So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes.
Yes, let's fight against ISIL-ISIS forces by speeding up the training of ISIL-ISIS forces.
We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
The meeting in the White House over 2 years ago, everyone in the national security team recommended arming ISIS.
We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
The U.S.-led ISIS coalition.
We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
I've been skeptical from the get-go about the notion that we were going to effectively create this proxy army inside of Syria.
Tonight I call on Congress again to give us additional authorities and resources to train and equip these fighters.
1984, of course, points out that it's this weird Orwellian world where your enemy is now your friend, is now your enemy, and you're never at war, you're always at war, you're never at war. There's perpetual war, and the sides are always flipping, and it's not supposed to make sense.
We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
А вы чего? Разве вы не понимаете, кто там воюет? Там воюют наемники. В основном. Вы знаете, что там платят деньги?
Give us additional authorities and resources to train and equip these fighters.
I guess it's not supposed to make sense. I don't know.
I've been skeptical from the get-go.
We're speeding up training of ISIL forces.
About the notion that we were going to effectively create this proxy army inside of Syria.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So, here you go.
Already, the meeting in the White House over 2 years ago, everyone in the national security team recommended arming ISIS. And
there you go. The whole national security team recommended arming ISIS. Need I say more?
On top of that, I am concerned about this report about Syrian rebels and the ceasefire with ISIS. Senator
but
Paul,
that's not true.
Well,
it's not true.
It's
not
true.
Whether I don't care about the report. I know these people intimately. We talk to them all the time. I know these people intimately. We talk to them all the time.
It's a disaster, and here's the thing. We've been funding people who are allied with ISIS. ISIS is stronger because we've been funding Islamic rebels in Syria. It's a big mistake. It's a big mistake.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. We funded.
It looks like President Obama is even loosening the standards for putting weapons into the hands of people that we don't even pretend are vetted moderates, like that fiasco with those 4 or 5 fighters that they were able to produce some months back. Now we're talking about throwing weapons out there like Christmas cookies to people that we know are terrorists.
We must stop this madness. We must stop arming terrorists. I'm introducing the Stop Arming Terrorists Act today to prohibit taxpayer dollars from being used to support terrorists.
Cameron has given French bombers the use of Britain's base in Cyprus from which to conduct bombing raids on Syria. But unlike Russia, France is bombing without President Assad's permission and in support of Syrian rebels. With me is one of the world's greatest journalists who knows better than most about the impact of imperial wars, from Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos to the British Labour Party's catastrophic wars on Afghanistan and Iraq, and to David Cameron's destruction of the richest country in Africa, Libya. His new film, American Power in the Asia Pacific, and its new challenge from China is out next year. John Pilger, thanks for coming back on Going Underground. So how are ISIS the progeny of Washington, London and Paris?
Oh, they are not only the progeny, they are the fully grown up, manic, adolescent creature belonging to Paris, London, Obama, and the United States. Without the support of these 3 countries, without the arms that have been given to ISIS, either they've been given directly to Jabhat al-Nusra and have gone to ISIS, or they've gone the other way, or they've gone to the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but the French, the British, the Americans, and the Turks have all supplied those who have kept ISIS going.
At the White House, President Obama welcomed the Emir of Qatar.
We had a significant meeting of the minds. We are both committed to making sure that ISIL is defeated.
Well, committed and meeting of the minds isn't exactly a view shared by everyone. According to reports, Qatar is now the biggest source of private funding for ISIS. At the same time that it's home to a key U.S. airbase for launching airstrikes against the terrorists.
Do you acknowledge that Qatar has been a significant source of especially private donations to ISIS and other terrorist groups?
Well, Michelle, what we acknowledge is that there are areas where we disagree with the Qataris, but more often we find that our interests overlap.
So can you say whether pressure is on them now to stop that financing?
We do believe that there is more that they can do and more that we can do together to shut down the financing of terror operations around the globe.
Then Jonathan Schanzer, who is a former counterterrorism analyst for the U.S., says, you have a lot of people now that are invested in the business of extremism in Turkey. If you start to challenge that, it raises significant questions of whether the militants, their benefactors, and other war profiteers would tolerate the crackdown. Now, again, here in the U.S., we have our own war profiteers, and they're considered very legitimate, and they sell a lot of weapons. And do they also push politicians into further and further war? Absolutely. But here in this case, once people started making profit off of the relationships that they had set up with ISIS, well, they didn't want to let that profit go. That leads to even more and deeper ties.